So our session outline says, first, first point, the Son of God rests in the care of his Father. The second point we're going to look at is the Son of God exerts authority over his creation. And the third is the Son of God calls for faith from his followers. We're all working here in, all these points are drawn from Mark chapter 4. What will we learn? That in calming a storm, Jesus revealed that he is the Son of God, the one who has authority over all nature. How will my group see Christ in this? Well, Jesus showed that he cared for his disciples by calming the storm that threatened their lives, and then called on them to have faith in him. Jesus would later demonstrate God's love in a greater way by laying down his life to provide salvation from sin and death. To all who have faith in him, have eternal life. How should we respond? Because we are loved by God who has authority over all creation, we seek to demonstrate bold faith in him, no matter our circumstance, so that others might come to trust in Jesus for salvation. So what is our setting for our passage today? Well, Jesus has been teaching all day. Anyone here ever taught for a whole day? What effect would that have on you? He'd been surrounded by a very large crowd. He was speaking from inside of a boat from the Sea of Galilee. He was using parables to reveal truths about the kingdom of God. Remember, that was where he taught about the kingdom of God is like a mustard tree. Begins as this little seed, but then grows into this big tree that many animals can live in and nest in. This parable-type teaching was an effective way of demonstrating spiritual truths to people in an earthly world. So parables use concepts drawn directly from nature in a way that's different, by the way, than how the Greeks and the Romans used nature. In their object lessons, they had what were called fables. And in a fable, an animal could be a character. Okay? Jesus never did that. He never gave character to creatures. He uses nature in his illustrations, but he doesn't give animals character. The Hebrews were very zealous to make sure that their teachings were scientific in the sense that they had a correct view of the laws of nature, whereas other cultures, they didn't have to abide by that. So Jesus uses real-life object lessons, and he places invisible truths inside of those. Its understanding then becomes more clear. On top of that, Jesus is privately to his own disciples explained everything. So they had the added advantage over the crowds as they got Jesus' commentary afterwards. So they effectively had the teacher's outline and notes to go with the verbal lecture. The Sea of Galilee is a sea in Israel that is fed by the Jordan River. It is the lowest freshwater lake on earth. Being low and surrounded by hills, violent storms can rapidly occur with the waters swirling when the winds come in. Okay, I did a little research on that. That was quoted from our curriculum. I did a little research on that. Violent storms on the Sea of Galilee are not real common. So I think in this story, what we actually have is something that's uncommon. In fact, the last time waves were registered at like plus 15 feet on the Sea of Galilee that I could find out was in 1992. So it's not something, the kind of waves that would be high enough to capsize a boat are not real common there. Now, that's not to say that the weather patterns haven't changed in the last 2,000 years, but just going on what we know about that lake today. The storm that is described here. Yeah. Okay. So let's turn the page. Just a little technical point of interest there. Our verse here is from Mark chapter 4, 35 through 38. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves The word for great there, the Greek is mega. That's where we get the word mega from. And the waves were breaking into the boat, so the boat was already filling, but he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So verses 1 from chapter 4, together with 35 and 36 here, indicate Jesus had been teaching a large crowd till the evening hours. What effect would that have, speaking to a crowd all day on Jesus? Yes, yeah. Even Jesus can be tired, can't he? How is Jesus' humanity put on display in the first half of verse 38? Yes.
I gotta wonder.
Ryan.
You know, nothing surprises God, right? Nothing for God to work all day without stopping.
Yeah.
But in the body,
Yeah.
it had to be a pretty eye-opening experience. I watched the shows and part of the shows where Jesus is out healing and preaching, and he comes back, and everyone else is back at the camp by the fire talking. Here he comes looking like some beat up homeless.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Really
yeah.
bad. Like he looked they did a really good job. He looked just completely spent.
There is a verse somewhere in one of the Gospels where it talks about he looked older than he was. Mm-hmm. Well, that was from a life of being an itinerant preacher.
But I reference it to pastors that I know on Sundays.
Yeah.
Even Dan after the second service, he's not hanging around the whole
lot
because he's beat.
Yeah.
Having the Spirit upon you, even for
that's right. I can attest to that. I've preached 2 services before, and you are wiped out. You're ready to go home, and you're ready for a nap. Yes, Donna.
He was so exhausted that he didn't.
Yes.
See, he was really out.
Yeah. So if you're thinking that he's just playing games with them here, like, let's see how these guys deal with this situation. I'm just going to pretend like I'm asleep over here. He probably wasn't pretending. Okay, let's continue. How might crossing this... Now, this is a trick question here. You may not... Don't feel bad if you don't get this. But how would crossing to the other side of the Sea of Galilee at this point, we're near Capernaum, on the opposite side, how would that give him a respite or a break from these crowds? Okay, that's a valid point. But let's go to chapter 5. Someone read verse 11 for us. What does it say?
A large herd of pigs feeding on the nearby hillside.
Yeah, so remember, he got to the other side, and there's a demon there, and he cast a demon out of this man into a herd of pigs. Well, that's a dead giveaway, isn't it? We're not in Jewish territory. So I think crossing to the other side, now we don't see this from our modern sensibilities, but I think the first century or second century reader would go, oh, he wanted to go over to the Gentile side of the lake because there's no other way to get a break from these crowds. Everywhere he goes, there's crowds. Now, the other interesting thing about this Gentile man that was delivered from demonic activity, he then starts witnessing about who Jesus is. He's the first Gentile witness. And Jesus didn't tell him, be quiet about this. Which reminds me of the Samaritan woman. Remember, he didn't tell her, don't go back to your city and tell everyone that I'm Messiah. He said, yeah, go tell them. But when he was in Israel among the Jews, when he healed people and took demons out of people, he'd say, don't go spreading this. Let's keep this between you and me for now. Now, and why would that be at this point in his ministry? Why would he do that? Yes, Lisa. Yes. He wants to reach all of Israel with the gospel before they kill him. Yeah. And so he wants all gospel the gospel to be heard by all of Israel, by as many cities and villages as he can. And when he can't even keep up with that, he deputizes 70 to go out with the job. And they weren't ordained ministers. They were deputized to just go, right? And just tell them what you can. And because he wants this generation to receive the gospel before he's crucified. He knows that he's going to end up crucified. He's read the suffering servant passages of Isaiah. He knows what's going to happen. Okay. So how is the storm described in verse 37? Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that it was a windstorm. It wasn't necessarily thunder and lightning and rain, but I mean, there might have been rain, but it just seems like the wind just blows up. Yeah. And has anyone ever been in a small boat? I'm sorry, you. Yeah, these boats. There actually is somewhere in that region. There's a museum that has a boat from this era, and they call it the Jesus boat. There's a museum that has the Jesus boat. Yeah, and it's about from me to you in length. Yeah, and it doesn't have really curved. These boats didn't have a curved body like this. They were really more like this. So you can see how the waves would go over something like this. It's really designed for holding maximum amount of fish. It's not really designed for going through deep, wavy waters. So what was my question there again? Has anyone here ever been in a boat in a storm? I've actually experienced this. And what was your experience, Lisa?
We're in Hawaii, and we were out, and the water was getting racing back to shore, and there was a water spout. Oh my God.
A water spout. Wow. It was scary, right? It's terrifying. Yeah. Bill, you've done a fair amount of fishing and boating. Have you ever been out in a storm? Okay. Yeah, my father and I were fishing on Whitewater Lake, and I must have been 4 or 5 years old. And we rented a rowboat, and he had his own outboard that he put on, and we went out into the middle. This is a lake that's about 20 miles west of Lake Geneva, and it's not a big lake. And we were out, and the guy told us, I wouldn't go out. There's a storm coming in. So we had some sense that it was coming in. And as I said, I was only 4 or 5. My memory is kind of sketchy, but I remember thunder, lightning, rain, and the rain was coming so fast. My dad dumped his bait out of the coffee can, the Folgers coffee can, and gave it to me to start bailing water out. And I remember lightning hitting the lake, and I remember we couldn't see the shore. The rain was falling so hard, and my dad he just steered in one direction and kind of held, and all of a sudden up through the fog and the rain, we saw a boathouse. And the door was open, and we went right into the boathouse. And the first thing my dad said was, "Don't you dare tell your mother about this." So when we got to the gravesite to bury my father, may he rest in peace, there was no priest there to perform the service. And so my stepmother asked me if I would do the interment. And I went over to the hearse driver, and he had a little folder in his glove box that I could follow the service. So I did it, and then I told that story. And the way I told it is, my dad, he died from Alzheimer's, and he was in a fog, and he couldn't see the shore, and now he sees the shore, and now he is in a safe harbor. So, anyways, Psalm 107, would someone read Psalm 107, 23 through 32? And this gives you an idea of how Jewish people, how Hebrew people thought about water and storms on water. Yes, please.
13?
23 through 32.
I mean, the verse.
Psalm 107, verse 23 through 32.
Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven and went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil flight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works, children of men. Let them extol him in the congregation of the people, and praise him in the assembly of the elders.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, so the Hebrew people were not they did not have a love of water. I don't think there ever was a very much of a Hebrew navy, even in the days of Solomon. They had ships, but I think it was mostly just for commercial purposes. But yeah, so they didn't really. They saw, in fact, the sea is often used in the Psalms as a description of the untamed world that is in opposition, in rebellion. The question posed of Jesus here, do you not care that we are perishing, is answered in 1 Peter 5:7, isn't it? What does it say in 1 Peter 5:7? Some of you have probably memorized this verse. Go ahead, Ryan. Yes, cast all your anxieties upon him, for he cares for you. So the answer Jesus could have said is, yes, of course I care for you guys. Why are you panicking? So point 2, this brings us to point 2. He awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. I love this. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Reminds me of those passages in Genesis 1 where it says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God said, let there be. And everything he says, let there be, it is answered with, and there was. And here he says, peace, be still, and there was. Exactly what he commanded. Before we study this passage, I just want to make a list of the 3 categories of miracles that are in the Bible. And we don't necessarily have to read those passages. I think you guys can probably guess. Do you mind if I erase this? I think you guys can probably guess. There are 3 different kinds of miracles. And these are throughout the whole Bible. Let's say the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. That would be a miracle of nature. Then remember when Elijah was called by the widow and said, my son is dead? And he went to her house. He laid on the son, and I think he breathed on him, or if I remember that right. But anyways, he healed him. So we have these remarkable healings. Jesus actually raised people from the dead. So we call this healing, miracles of healing. Then the third one, which we didn't really unpack this in chapter 5, were the exorcism of the demon. Exorcism. The casting out of demons. Now, of these 3 categories, what we're going to see throughout a study of the New Testament is Jesus does all 3. And I believe he's the only example we have in the Bible where you have all 3. The other thing is the exorcism part is not very well developed in the Old Testament era. When the Pharisees said, he is casting out devils by the power of Beelzebub, That would be the local Canaanite god, who is like satanic. And he said, no, the fact that I am casting out demons is a sign to you that the kingdom of heaven is in your midst. So when Jesus comes, and everywhere he goes, he's casting out demons. Even his disciples have the power to cast out demons. This is a relatively new thing in terms of Bible history. Pharisees made some attempt at exorcism. We don't know a lot about it. It was going on, but I don't know if there was anything like the kind of success that we're seeing in the ministry of Jesus. So this is really, there's many nature miracles, many healing miracles in the Old Testament, but when we come to this miracle, it's pretty new. The word rebuke here is a really interesting word choice. It was used also in Matthew 8 and Luke 8, where you have parallel accounts to this story. So it must be a really important word. It's an interesting word choice for a nature miracle. It feels more like the kind of word choice you would see down here, doesn't it? When you say, when Jesus rebuked the demons, well, here he's using that word in a nature, and so it's kind of an odd word choice, which makes me wonder. Let me continue. He was admonishing conscious beings when he used that word, the religious leaders and the demons. But wind is an unconscious, morally neutral dynamic of nature. The word rebuke might indicate here that Jesus was commanding something that was consciously malicious, namely the power of the prince of the air.
So maybe there is something spiritual.
Yes, this might have been something diabolical. Now, in the book of Job, it said that Satan had the power to create a lightning storm. He is called the power of the prince of the air. So, it's not explicit, but just the word choice rebuke kind of makes you think. Yes, Ryan?
Wasn't the servants of Job's kid dying where
Yeah. Yeah, yep. And that was all the power that... Now, God allows Satan to have that power. But the point is, the Bible records elsewhere that he does have that power. And I've always believed that when Jesus was taken by Satan up to the temple and he said, if you worship me, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world, I don't think he was exaggerating. I think he actually... I'd love to sometime go back to the Old Testament, especially Deuteronomy 32:8 on that, but we would be going down a major rabbit trail on that. But anyways, let me continue. There might be an example of the binding of the strong man here. Now, we normally think of the binding of the strong man is in these exorcisms. And even in some cases, healings, some of the sicknesses that might have been, the affliction of the demons. But there's a binding of the strong man even in nature miracles. You see that? Yes.
Remember in the Gospels it talks about how Jesus people that were blind from birth.
Yes.
Indicate that it was not
Exactly.
that it
Yeah.
came on afterwards. Probably why they were in one.
Yep.
That was his power over nature.
Yeah. Forgive me if I even hinted that I attribute sickness to, spiritual, like a spiritual deficiency or defect on the part of anyone. It can be, yes. So let me continue. Jesus might have used the word rebuke just to show his disciples that he was zealous for their protection. They were threatened, and that was the appropriate word in this situation because of how threatened they felt. So it has that quality too. It's interesting, I did a little bit of research on this. Sigmund Freud rightly observed, I will give this guy credit on this point, that man's greatest fears are those which are felt from the threat of the non-negotiable forces of nature. So he said that nature is our greatest threat. The reason why is because you can't negotiate with nature. When a tornado's coming at you, you can't sit down and say, hey, maybe we can strike some kind of peace accord here. But when you're dealing with the barbarians, you can send someone out to maybe negotiate with them. So Freud felt, now he wrongly interpreted that as the source of all religion. His theory about where does religion come from comes from man's fear of nature. That man's deepest fears were of nature. So if you subliminate it by ascribing a divine power behind it, then you can appease it. The only way to appease a tornado or a hurricane is to attribute it to some sort of pagan god and then worship it and et cetera. So that was Freud's theory of religion. But I do think he is right that the fear that these guys felt here, this is an overwhelming deep fear. Okay? So I'm sure I scored a lot of points on there saying, did you hear what our Sunday school teacher did? He agreed with Freud. So in the Greek text, peace be still, we're on the third page now. It means something like be quiet, shut up. Literally, that's kind of the force of the words. What happened then when he said, be quiet, shut up? Absolute calm. Yeah. When you are feeling anxiety, isn't it kind of noisy? Is anxiety noisy? Do you ever have discussions in your head with someone that you have a grievance against or someone you're at odds with, and it's just so noisy, and you just want to say, shut up, go away, leave me alone, right? Like anxieties can give you actually attacks, and they can cause you to become to despair, and you need to turn to Jesus in that and say, command this to go away. What do we learn here from what we can do in threatening situations? Yes. Just go to him. It was probably Peter who went to wake him up. And we don't have to wake him up or arouse him because he knows what's going on. But we can call out to him and say, I'm in a storm here. Help.
For many years, I suffered from anxiety because it would be so horrible that I would wake up, standing up like freaking out for really no reason. And it was really when I was listening to Derek Prince about the spirituality of this. I actually I learned to rebuke the spirit of fear, and I would immediately, like, all of a sudden it would start to come up, and I would feel it. And then all of a sudden I would say, I rebuke the spirit of fear, and it would go away. Like, I had to do this.
Yeah.
And I think for about 6 months, I continued to have to do it, and I'm actually over the spirit of fear. Sometimes it kicks up, but then I'll rebuke it, and it goes away.
Lisa, yeah. Yeah.
I've done that before.
Mm-hmm.
For a variety of emotions. I wish I had remembered that one. This was me yesterday. Teacher, don't you know?
Yeah.
Don't you see? What is going on?
Yeah.
So true. We have that authority, and sometimes we forget we have that authority.
We've been called as elders to pray for people, and one time we were called to a house to pray for someone who was having terror, and every night, just has been going on for I don't know how long. She was experiencing terror at night, so we went and laid hands on her and we prayed, and I'm pretty sure the word rebuke was used a couple times in our prayers, but that was she never had it again. And she still is not dealing with that anymore. Yes. Oh, did you have your hand raised? Oh, Major.
Yeah, thoughts come in my mind. I just say, Lord, I don't want
Yeah.
Not good. And it says, obviously, be removed, be peaceful. And sometimes I forget and allow it to be entertaining because it's fleshly stuff. And Lord, this is what I want to get rid of. This is not what I want. And it goes away. But if you forget to go to Him, which is frankly the only relief I get, the only way I know to get relief, because my flesh will want to entertain it. So He always is faithful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good.
That's the whole thing where we have to take captive every thought.
Take captive every thought. Yeah.
Take it in, because once you take that captive, it just goes.
Yeah.
You have to stop it from it. That's what I've been teaching myself to do. It's hard.
Yeah.
You want to meditate on it, but once you meditate, it's already.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever considered, I'm not trying to put a guilt complex on anyone, but when you're having those discussions in your head and you are justifying yourself in a discussion with someone else, like your position is the right position, they're wrong, and you're having this discussion, and you're, I don't know if you're aware of this, but that's what Satan does. Satan, what is he called? He's called the accuser.
Yes.
So here you are in your head, accusing someone. Oh my gosh! And one day I realized, wait a second, that's what Satan does. In fact, the word Satan that's not his name; that's his title. And I believe it comes from kind of a legal term, like a prosecuting attorney. Think about a courtroom scene, and the prosecutor comes in, and he's bringing accusations. Go to Revelations chapter 12. This is an odd place to see this. In the last place you would expect to find this. It says in verse 4. Now let me go to verse 7. A war arose in heaven. Now I want you to imagine that heaven is a courtroom in this scene. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated. And I love this. There was no longer any place for them in heaven. Now, what would happen to get a prosecuting attorney out of the courtroom of heaven? What would have to happen to disbar the prosecutor against who's bringing prosecution against us? Our guilt would have to be paid by Jesus. And then the prosecutor has no power in heaven. There's nothing for him there anymore because our guilt has been paid. And then it goes on to say, he was the great dragon. He was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels thrown down with him. I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers, see, there's that, who has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. You see, he had an accusation against us. And what this is depicting, in my mind, is he's been disbarred from heaven. He has no power there to bring charges against you or I. And the reason why he has no power is because we have conquered him by how? The blood of the Lamb. So that's the nature of Satan on display there. He's an accuser. And when we, in our mind, have all these anxieties and we're bringing charges and accusations against others, we're we are not being Christ-like in that situation, are we? We're being more like this guy. Again, I don't want to bring conviction on anyone, but there you have it. So let's get back to our passage here. He said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled. Now this is interesting. Here you'd expect them, if you've been saved from the Titanic, the ship's going down, and you've been saved, your first reaction, mine would be, But is that what their reaction is? What does it say? Fear of what? Of Jesus. Yeah. Now they have just witnessed a nature miracle on a grand epic scale. You know, they'd heard the stories about the Red Sea parting. They'd heard the stories about the walls of Jericho falling down with the trumpet blast. They'd never seen anything like this. And now they're witnessing it with their own eyes.
So something, I guess, maybe for them, it was just something like, yeah, you're just speaking all these things, but maybe actually seeing it, like in practice.
Yes.
Like,
he's not just a great moral teacher. He's not just a really wise teacher with a lot of knowledge of Scripture, but oh my God. Now they've seen him heal people, but wow, this, yes. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Go to Exodus chapter 20, verse 18 through 20. This is a really good verse for exactly what you're saying there, Maxine. Exodus 20, 18 through 20. Now, this is just prior to Moses going up to receive the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. The people, when all the people saw, I'm sorry, this is not prior, this is after, or during. When all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, "You speak to us. We'll listen to you, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die." Moses said to the people, and now here's the verse that I want to focus on. Do not fear. We're in chapter 9. We're in chapter 20. I'm sorry, did I say 18? Verse 18 through 20. Chapter 20, 18 through 20. And right now we're on the 20th verse. Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." So you see the word fear is used two very different ways there. It says, do not be afraid of God. Well, he loves you. Then he turns right around in the next breath and says, fear God, lest you sin.
I think a lot of it is taking place here. The disciples know that they are sinful human beings.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in some places in the scripture, they don't want Jesus around because he knows so much about you.
Yeah.
He knows the state you're in, and they fear, I don't measure up.
Yeah.
And he's holy.
Yeah.
Someone said, I don't remember who, "Depart from me, for I am a sinner."
Yes. I'm a sinner.
Yeah. Now, another verse I want to look at on this point is Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah, this is sort of in that same vein. Big book, Isaiah. And yet it's still the hardest to find. I'll never understand that. Okay. Now, I like this. Now, to our modern sensibilities, we don't fully appreciate the fear you would feel in the year that the king died. There's a reason why people say, "Long live the king," when they coronate a new king, because when the king dies, it's a regime change. Everything's up for grabs. And during a regime change, you could lose everything. There could be war. There could be political instability that could last for years. Why? Because the king died. And there's not a clear succession plan. So that's what Isaiah is confronted with here. And he says, in the year that I was afraid, like, what's going to happen? I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Now later on, he's going to be afraid of the fact that he's a sinner if we keep reading. the point there is the best solution to our fears of things that can happen in nature, things that can happen in the world, things that can happen in politics, is to fear God. Do you see that? The solution to fear. Now, who was it? Roosevelt said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." Well, actually, a Christian would say the solution to fear is fear itself, rightly appropriated in God. The solution to fear is to fear God. And so the disciples are learning that lesson here. They learn that this is not just a milquetoast teacher who has some really nice sayings. He speaks really nice platitudes that are comforting to hear. No, he has the power to command the storm. Any thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, so words are powerful. And Proverbs 15:4 says,